Welcome to Tallgrass, gentlemen. We're literally moments away from the world premiere. Tell me the excitement level. I mean, you got a hat. Oh, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I decided to cowboy up for the world premiere of Tokyo Cowboy. You want us to introduce ourselves?
Oh, God, we haven't even done that. Yes, go ahead.
All right. So I'm Marc Marriott. I'm the director of Tokyo Cowboy.
I'm Brigham Taylor, producer.
It's a great way to open. As far as like fun of an event, you know, there's bringing a fish out of water. This film very much is that wherever you go now. How much fun is it to kind of have that as a part of the film experience? Like, you get to live it when you present it, almost like that. I love that. Outside of your first screening in Montana.
Yeah, well, this is very exciting, being our world premiere. Wichita has been giving us a warm welcome. It feels great so far, and went over, checked out the theater. Classic, beautiful theater that's over 100 years old. I guess it just celebrated its 101st year. So I can't wait to have an audience there and watch this film. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and you're talking about also just us sort of living some sort of facsimile of this stranger in a strange land experience.
You're traveling along
yeah,
with it,
yeah. I walk down these streets, I can't hardly even read the signs. It's so alien to me. No, in truth, I've never been to Kansas in any meaningful way, so it's actually exciting to come to a new community, to experience a new festival, to meet new people. It's all great, and we live in hopes of them appreciating the movie that we've made as well, and we'll find out tonight.
We'll find out.
Well, they definitely will. I would love to know, looking back at that first screening, having the real guys there, we didn't dive into it. What was their response to it? What did they feel about their version on screen? Because there's so much a part of that sequence especially. We'll start with Montana, and then we'll get to the...
So you're talking about like the crew and also the cattle...
Yeah.
Wranglers that we had.
The fellow cowboys.
You know, we had Duncan there. Several of the guys. I talked with a few of them. They really loved this film, and that's very gratifying. I think that crew, local crew in Montana, they work on a lot of different films. I think they see a lot of the work that they do, and they don't always love it, and they love the film, and so that was really, really awesome to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of our big goals was to be pretty accurate to the situation. In this case, you had a guy coming from a business into a cattle ranch in the middle of Montana, and we wanted that to be really well represented as something that was accurate. In most cases, well, we learned a few things, made a few adjustments, but I think our local crew really recognized their home state in the representation in the film, and so that was nice. And I think they liked it to boot in general, so very gratifying. When
you guys were making this, was there any camaraderie moments that you had outside of filming that you tried to do just to get everyone acclimated? Was there anything you were doing like outside of the regular shoot?
No, I don't think so. It was a pretty normal, in terms of the process of getting people on board and getting acclimated to it. Most of them already were. It was us getting acclimated to them because both, when we were in Montana, there was just a few of us that were out of state that came in, and we spent just enough time on the ground to know how to not embarrass ourselves. And then we did that same thing again in Japan, and took on mostly a local crew and listened to them in terms of how things needed to be done, and they were great at trying to fulfill what it is we needed. So it was pretty smooth, but the process was similar to any filmmaking process that you engage in, I think.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering the first day of filming. I was on my way to the set, and it's just coming down snow. We knew that we could have weather, and in Montana, weather changes rapidly all the time, and but we also knew that if we shot snow that day, that we would have a really hard time matching that scene that we were doing in multiple different days, and so I remember that kind of bringing us together, and also just having a moment at the beginning of the filming, gathering all the crew and kind of just talking about how, this is really a movie about bringing people together that have, cultural differences, that have all kinds of different various personalities, cultures, backgrounds, all of that, and bridging those divides. And so we talked a little bit about how this process of making the film hopefully would bring us all together, and we'd have that similar feeling. And I really feel like it was that type of experience. It was really great.
Was there any personal, knowing that you'd been to Japan, you'd felt that when you were a younger man, was there any, not catharsis, but like, I don't know, memory tinges in your heart for getting to do something like this project in particular?
Yeah, this was just a gift to be able to have this experience, to have the great pleasure of bringing this talented group of actors and crew members, writers, producers together, and also just to see Arata, our actor that plays Hideki, him coming to Montana for the first time, experiencing that, being very new to that, and that did. I cast my mind to think about the time that I went into a similar, very foreign country and was experiencing things for the first time. And Arata, is not proficient in English, and so he really worked hard to be understood and to speak in English. And I was really working hard to understand and speak Japanese. And so, it was kind of a full circle moment for me, definitely.
Brigham, you shared when we were talking about getting him that when he came back with you, like, I could do this at this point of the timeline, like knowing that you'd have to shift for the actor, making that decision, looking back. As a producer, that's got to be a massive thing in your head that, gosh, thank God we did that because he's incredible. And it works for the film, but that could have been something completely game-changing.
Yeah. There's few things, maybe nothing as important as casting to the success of your movie. And I think Marc understood that. And, you're referring to the time that we actually offered him the movie, through an intermediary out in Japan. And we were bowled over because he said, yeah, I'm interested, but I can't do it for another 8 months. And so you can't shoot in September, in other words, was the answer there, but maybe in May. And so we said thank you and allowed ourselves a little time to, it's a big adjustment. But the short story is we waited. And
turned out to really help.
Yeah. There's all kinds of course, we even talked about this fact that, more time to prepare a movie is rarely a bad thing. Yeah. Rarely. And the big complication, of course, that we weren't shooting during growing season, and Marc figured a workaround for that, which you can talk about. But finally getting Arata, who we'd met only via Zoom, and obviously we'd seen his work, but meeting him in person was a really lovely experience. He was everything you want him to be. He was completely open, completely willing. He was the star of a movie, but he was sort of as committed and unfussy as you can imagine. And but most importantly, just on screen, he really represented two things for us that were really, really important, which is a guy who had this inner turmoil, who was disconnected internally in a way that he couldn't even understand, and that's a subtle thing to play, but he did really well. But also a guy who wasn't exceptionally warm, but just through his own bearing, someone you actually cared about, just to sit there and watch, and you invest in him even when he's not behaving in a way that you totally support. And so those were things that were really, really important, and he brought that in spades.
Yeah,
it was
those
great.
were those intangibles that when we first saw him and were making that decision and said that is the guy. If we can get that guy, that will be one of the best things we can do for the movie. And we just recognized that in him, and he brought it. So it's great.
He's your Tokyo Cowboy. I can't imagine anyone other than him. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can't either now. Yeah, really.
I'd love to ask, as far as like the process of making this such a weird film to see come to fruition, knowing that you guys have done so many different types of films, like what were the obstacles that when you look back were like, that's the toughest things we had? Was it getting the cast timing difference? Was it something else? Like, because this project's so different than any other film I've seen made.
Yeah, well, let's see. One of the things I'm thinking about is just the quinceanera, which was the last scene that we shot, and such an important part of the film in terms of Hideki's journey and kind of where he takes a turn. The fact that it was going to rain. It was going to rain that night, and I had it planned out with our cinematographer and with all the production in a certain way that did not include any kind of a tent. And just had it in my head that way, and then we just were pretty certain that it was going to rain, and indeed it did. And so all of the crew was there. This was the last scene that we shot in Montana, the last day of filming, and we put up this tent, and the tent actually ended up being kind of a lifesaver, and was a beautiful kind of setting, but also helped balance out some of the lighting conditions that we had, and make this little intimate space. So there's sometimes there's things that you just can't anticipate. They're not exactly what you had planned for, but you only have the option of figuring out how to use it and to pivot. And everybody on the crew was just fantastic. We were able to find that tent. Everybody gathered. We all were hoisting it all together. So on a small budget film like this, there really is a feeling of we're all in this together. Let's just all together get in there and get it done, and nothing else to do.
Yeah, that was a fun experience and a trying night, but it all came together. The other thing that was unique in terms of any experience I had was having something that was just a fundamentally, multilingual project. Yeah. And so not just English and Japanese, even Spanish. But because we had to have so much back and forth, the whole puzzle within a production to be able to have two languages, and in many cases where a lot of your crew, especially when you're in Montana, of course, that don't speak that language, but we need to generate reports, and we got to translate scripts, we got to translate documents and call sheets, and you name it. And you start thinking about all these simple things you take for granted. All of a sudden, you have to replicate that accurately in a way that you're not going to offend or you're going to miscommunicate. It was crazy. And even on set, we wound up having to find translators, both going English to Japanese and vice versa. And we're kind of, we're in not a densely populated place. We had to look around, and credit to our local producer, Jerry Rafter, who found us one Japanese national living in Bozeman, and the other person Mark found through, the university, who had a graduate student in Japanese language who was an American kid. And so between the two of them, they functioned. But these are all complications that aren't, normally you don't have to deal with. Or if you do, on a larger production, you have a whole line item and you can get a whole raft of people in there at the snap of a finger. Here, we had to go find these people. And so it was complicated, but it all worked out, luckily.
You mentioned something about the grow season. I don't want to reveal anything about trees or anything like that, because I think it's a pivotal part of the story about that reveal of trees at the end. And but can you share with us why that was impacted? Why the growing? Was it to deal with the trees or something I'm thinking of differently?
The crops. That's what I was referring to as
the quinoa.
That we went from fall to spring.
You wouldn't have been able to grow the quinoa.
Yeah, so we were in an area where we could have grown quinoa, that little valley, and we really looked into, what would it take to do that, but that would only happen in the summer through the fall, and we would have to time it so that it's like growing at the right time. So, in and of itself, that would have been a challenging thing, but then all of a sudden we're going to be shooting in May, there is no quinoa. So I did a little bit of research. I talked to some growers of quinoa. I found the most colorful quinoa that I could find, because most of the quinoa that is grown for consumption is very kind of bland looking. It's just kind of, you know, brown, whatever. But there's some very colorful quinoa, and so I love that. Found a farmer, talked to him. He was willing to let us come. I found an art person that would go and with a U-Haul and harvest a bunch of this quinoa, and I found out that it would be accurate because the way they harvest quinoa is they let it dry in the ground and then harvest it. So being that this would be dried over 8 months, it was okay. And so we got this loads of quinoa. We put it in the barn on set at the O'Hare Ranch up in this upper barn, hung it to dry, hoped that, you know, rats and pigeons wouldn't get it, and came back in time to do some tests and put this quinoa in these pallets, kind of these 4x4 like styrofoam or I don't know, you know, foam core sheets that we could move around to camera, and very convincingly created a quinoa crop, you know, shooting through multiple layers of these, you know, boards of quinoa to make it look like there's a lot in the foreground. And just that was a logistical challenge that once we knew that we were postponing until May, we knew we'd have to deal with, but fortunately it worked out really well, and it was, you know, such an important part of the story. So
yeah, even though I messed up there, I'm glad I asked. That's wild. Wow.
Well, yeah, you're referring to something else which is important, but that wasn't impacted by the season.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. What a great quinoa story.
Quinoa. Probably your first.
Yeah. You know, speaking of Goya's performance, that role could have been so different, such an interesting. I love your casting of him. You know, talk about bringing him on. Did he bring something different? You said something earlier to me that was. You were almost like scared of him when you first met him. There's an edge to him.
On the paper, when I was watching the different auditions, because we just got tape auditions before we set up a Zoom to meet them and do more intensive auditioning. But the first thing I wrote down was crazy eyes. Like, I remember just kind of thinking like this guy he's a little dangerous, you know, like you don't know what's going on with him. And that at first, I have to be honest that at first I was a little bit taken aback by that. I was a little bit scared of that. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing, but as he auditioned and showed us how the insight that he had into this character, the intense preparation that seemed effortless, his natural ability to be authentic and also, you know, to actually put on, his father is from Ecuador. I think that's right.
His stepfather is Salvadorian, yeah. Or Nicaraguan. I'm sorry, I have to ask him again, but Central America.
Anyway, he copied the accent of I thought it was his father, but anyway, he just was really wonderful. And as we you know watched him, he really did just stand out immensely from all the others, and I was so glad that we found him. Yeah.
I love him. He's great. I'm curious, as in your journeys of filmmaking and producing, I'm really curious. Has there been a fish out of water moment in your own life that now that you've made this wild project, you can reflect on differently or look at differently?
A fish out of water moment in my life. Yeah, so many. It's like not necessarily in the context of what we see in this film, where you're picking up and going to another country. I hadn't done like Marc obviously had, and he can speak to that. This whole thing is in part inspired by that very process. But for me, I don't think I have to look any further than walking into a strange room, you know, where you haven't been, or into the company of people where you've never met. It's like we are always walking into a space that we feel unfamiliar with, or we feel ill at ease. or we don't know, if not the actual language, we don't know the coded language that's there. It happens all the time. And so I feel like I'm in that position a lot. And you have to find your way, or you can retreat. You can make a lot of choices, but each choice has an impact. So I think it's a universal feeling, in other words, to feel like a stranger in a strange place. And so even though there's a story about a Japanese salaryman coming to a Montana cow ranch, you could apply that. I mean, anyone can, I think, find themselves in a familiar situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is so true. This is a universal experience, and I think that's hopefully what audiences will relate to, that they'll be able to relate to this character Hideki and his journey, and also his discovery of that he needs to kind of slow down. He needs to start listening. He needs to become connected where he's not connected. All of us need to do that. I need to do that daily. And then, of course, Brigham alluded to the fact that I lived in Japan for several years, and it had this tremendous impact on me in those same ways. Like I became a much better listener during that experience, and it really benefited me later.
I know we're kind of early in the game. We're literally about to have the world premiere here in like less than an hour. But I'm curious, how can people keep track of Tokyo Cowboy? I want people to see this film. It's one of my favorites of the year. It blew me away. I would love to know, how can people keep track of it? What can they do? Yeah,
hashtag Tokyo Cowboy Film. Also, our website is tokyocowboyfilm.com. So we'll keep people updated. We're excited to start this journey. Can't wait to discover and go on this journey with our audiences, and so yeah. I'm super excited.
Yeah, no, and so we will continue to appear in festivals, and obviously all that information will be on that website or on the Instagram account, and we don't know. This is the beginning of that, to figure out like who else we might be able to partner with in the near future to get this movie to an even broader audience. But I feel certain that we'll find that right partnership, and it might come as a result of tonight's screening. We don't know, but that's part of the fun. Part of the fun of making an independent film is going all the way to this stage and still having these big question marks to answer. But
every film that you've done up until this point has had a marketing team, and it already has a release date. And
true,
so
yeah, this is a new
thing for Brigham, and certainly for me.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, it has been a pleasure to get to know you guys for these last few weeks. I love the film. Thank you guys for bringing it to Tallgrass.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.